Shortly after capturing the Monteras, the U.S. military brazenly hijacked a Russian oil tanker in the Atlantic Ocean. Trump's blatant provocation has completely ignited Russia's anger. According to multiple media reports on January 9, the Russian Foreign Ministry warned the United States that sending troops to seize the Russian-flagged oil tanker Mariner Ray, on the grounds of violating sanctions, will have serious consequences for civilian maritime traffic. Across Europe, the Atlantic, and even globally, the Russian side pointed out that all countries, including the United States, must first seek Russia's opinion before taking any action against ships flying the Russian flag. However, on this occasion, the United States ignored Russia's repeated protests, forcibly seized the vessel, and even threatened to send the Russian crew to the United States for trial. This clearly constitutes a serious violation of maritime law and international law. Moscow warned that this move by the U.S. sets a dangerous precedent, greatly lowering the threshold for the use of force against civilian ships, while at the same time exacerbating the already highly tense U.S.-Russia relations. If the Russian Foreign Ministry's statement could be described as restrained, the attitude of senior Russian officials was extremely tough. According to Russian media reports, Zhuarov, first deputy chairman of the Defense Committee of the Russian Duma, publicly called for a military counterattack against the United States, such as using torpedoes to sink several U.S. warships. If the United States dares to escalate the conflict, then the Kremlin may well respond with nuclear weapons. Other Russian experts suggested seizing U.S. cruise ships in the Baltic or Black Seas. As a countermeasure, Gurilyov, a Russian Duma member and retired general, stated that if U.S. ships refuse inspection by the Russian side, they can be sunk if necessary. Yet despite the groundswell of anger within Russia, with calls for Putin to take tough measures against the U.S., the Kremlin has maintained a rare silence. Putin has not made any public statement regarding the U.S. military's seizure of the Russian oil tanker. The outside world believes that this actually indicates that Russia has no particularly effective means of retaliation. Sources claim that at the very moment U.S. forces intercepted the Russian oil tanker, a Russian nuclear submarine was standing by nearby. Yet, in the face of the U.S. operation, the Russian submarine exercised restraint and did not take drastic measures to prevent the U.S. from hijacking the Russian vessel. Based on this, Indian military experts have concluded that the Russian military is simply unable to compete with the United States or an ADO in a conventional conflict. Although Russia possesses a nuclear arsenal comparable to that of the U.S., Putin will certainly not resort to nuclear weapons unless absolutely necessary. It is clear that Putin believes the U.S. seizure of an oil tanker falls far short of the threshold for using nuclear weapons. More importantly, Russia currently lacks the strength to open a second front, fully maintaining its advantageous position in the Russia-Ukraine conflict has already stretched Russia to its limits. If it were to become entangled in a conflict with the United States, the consequences would be severe. Ultimately, the United States dared to break this bottom line, precisely because, as seen through Russia's true capabilities, now mired in a costly war of attrition in Ukraine, Russia has long lost the capital to confront the United States on a global scale. Although hawkish figures like Zhuarov have made shocking remarks about nuclear retaliation, this only exposes Russia's helplessness. Trump is clearly convinced of this. Putin will never press the nuclear button and drag the whole world down with him, just for the sake of a single oil anchor and its crew. Furthermore, from a geostrategical perspective, the current state of the Russian Navy makes it difficult to sustain a transoceanic standoff far from its shores. Not to mention that in the Atlantic Ocean, the Russian military lacks effective supply hubs, simply in terms of the modernization level of its surface ships. In its blue-water combat capabilities, the current Russian Navy is already no match for the massive U.S. carrier strike groups. Faced with the U.S. military's salami-slicing style of maximum pressure, Moscow is caught in a strategic dilemma. If it takes tough action to sink a U.S. warship, it will inevitably trigger full NATO intervention, plunging Russia into the nightmare of a 2- from war, something Putin absolutely cannot afford. But if it swallows its anger and submits, not only will its dignity as a major power be completely shattered, but the U.S. military will only become more unscrupulous in the future, intercepting Russia's energy trade routes and severing its economic lifeline. All things considered, lacking effective conventional means of retaliation and unwilling to escalate to nuclear war, apart from strong diplomatic protests and verbal military threats, the Putin administration will most likely have no choice but to swallow the bitter pill in silence, make a few fierce threats, and then let the matter drop.